Today's a pretty exciting day for me. I'm finally building my 1990 Chevy Caprice, aka Chevy CaPIECE. So if you're familiar with my channel, with my twin turbo Crown Vic, you know I have a thing for old cop cars, and you can blame these old Chevy Caprices for that. This restoration is long overdue on this car. I've owned this car for a better part of 20 years. And it has been stuck in the back corner of my shop for my someday build, and then into a shipping container for farther back into a someday build. And today is finally that day, and we're going to get going on it. So we'll use the mighty tracker to push the car in, and we'll get going on tearing this thing down and getting ready. We're going to be doing a full restoration on this, about as full as you can go without pulling the body off the frame. This is going to go pretty quick, so I'm going to do the best I can, explain what I'm doing every step of the way. We're going to start by yanking the stock 350. This is a throttle body injected 350. This is the original motor of the car. And really the only mods done to it were just the headers. For all the pressure washing I did, it still looks pretty dirty, but that's okay. So front suspension now, we're using Viking coilovers on factory control arms with polyurethane bushings. We're going to be running the factory spindle with factory 11-inch rotor. Later on in the video, we'll be upgrading the calipers to a Wilwood caliper. While everything's apart, we're gonna wire wheel everything and paint it with some Rust-Oleum flat black professional. So only the professional can is the one I'd use. All the others don't even compare. So it's the professional with a 15-minute label on the can. It's usually top shelf at Home Depot. Now let's take a look at the motor. So this is a 302 small block Chevy that I've been building for quite a while. Don't mistake it for a 305. This is a 4-inch bore and a 3-inch stroke, so this is going to be a really high revving motor. So I have the engine set up on the engine run stand. This is a build also on the channel, but this we're going to set the timing. It's going to be a little bit on the lazy side because we don't want to combine detonation on our new bearings and all that fun stuff. So I like to break them in with timing on a little bit on the lazy side. This is a 11-to-1 motor with a solid roller camshaft.
Not bad for a first start.
So it's been running now for about 30 minutes. Periodically, while it's running, I like to test each cylinder with that thermostat that I'm using there. It's just a laser thermostat. It's nothing special. But if you see a discrepancy in temperature from one cylinder to another, it could potentially be a problem, maybe with a valve not being adjusted correctly, or a ring's not seated right, or anything that's amiss that could be causing a difference in compression on one cylinder or another, or sealing of one cylinder or another. It will all show up in temperature there. It's interesting, you can actually see the thermostat open. Yes, it just opens right there. So I'm pretty happy with the way that thing ran on the stand. I pulled the valve covers, checked the valves, made sure we didn't need any further adjustment as they broke in, which on a roller camshaft you really shouldn't, but you never know, you could have made a mistake again on it. So I went ahead and dropped the motor in and put it on polyurethane mounts. And then we'll just use a ratchet strap to kind of hold the motor so it doesn't fall backwards. And that way it's kind of adjustable, so you can kind of pitch the angle of it when you're setting the transmission. So what you're looking at here is a ZF6, and we're converting it to hydraulic clutch for a traditional style clutch. Normally these ZF6, these are from 4th gen Vettes. These would have a pull style clutch, a diaphragm clutch, and a dual mass flywheel and all that stuff. So we're converting it to use a conventional style clutch. And we're using this hydraulic conversion that bolts on and replaces that front bearing retainer. All right, this is where our first problem arises. The stack up of that hydraulic conversion bearing, the hydraulic conversion bearing that we got on the front of the transmission, is too thick. So it's going to be pushing on the clutch, on the pressure plate, without any hydraulics. So, and that compounds as the clutch wears out. That problem will actually get worse because those fingers actually grow farther out as the clutch wears out. So then the problem would start getting worse and worse and worse as the clutch wears. So we need to build some play into that. So we're measuring basically from the transmission mounting surface to the bearing surface. And we need to also add play in that for future wear in the clutch. So we need to somehow remove some space from this whole setup. But first, let's install a different clutch. So I swapped the clutches out, and they're both within 10,000ths of each other. So it's not the clutch issue. So maybe it's the flywheel is sticking everything too far back. I don't know, but I don't have another flywheel that I want to use on this thing because that one's spec'd for the RPMs of this engine. So we're going to have to modify this hydraulic bearing. So I took it off, and this is the part that bolts to the transmission itself. So this is the very first piece of the system. I put it chucked it up in my lathe. I made sure it was running true, and we're going to take 130 thousandths off the face of it. And then we also need to take 130 thousandths off then the bearing retaining part of it as well, so that we don't over apply pressure to the front input bearing. So you can see in this view here that it looks like I'm missing an area with the cutter, and that's actually an oil passage for the front bearing. And luckily, it's deep enough to where oil should still be able to flow through it just fine even after we took our 130 thousandths off of it. So that's not going to be too much of an issue. Another thing I'm going to point out is it is possible that you shim everything out instead of doing this work to this bearing, is shimming the transmission out away from the flywheel. And I don't like doing that unless it's an absolute last resort. I did omit the gasket from it, so we're just using aviation sealer instead, and that buys us a few more thousandths as well, since I was trying to take as minimal off that housing as I possibly could. But everything worked out now, and so now we're going to install it for good, which means I have to put the bell housing on the transmission first, because otherwise it's really hard to get that thing installed up there with those lines the way they are. So the top one traditionally would be your bleeder. The bottom one would be your pressure side. You can run them either way. I usually run them opposite of that, and that's because I reverse bleed everything. So I'll pump fluid through the bottom and out the master cylinder, and so therefore I want the air to be traveling up that way. So if you're going to bleed it traditionally, you'd want those lines opposite. So now we got it all installed, and now I'm going to mark out where I need my transmission tunnel modified or cut out so that the thing will fit up in there. And so I just used an extension on a drill that holds the drill bit, and I basically just go up top now and connect the dots on all the holes I drilled. So that works out pretty well. And then if you're in question of a few areas, you just cut it a little short of your holes and figure it out. Mine ended up being pretty good to the holes. Obviously, you'll have to square those up a little bit because they're not going to be cosmetically appealing from the bottom, but that'll give you your minimum hole size anyway. Now we're making a transmission mount. I'm using a leaf spring style mount, and we're going to mount this so that the bolt is running front to back in the car, so that the torque of the engine torquing, isn't trying to be resisted from the transmission mount itself. And now warning, I'm going to go into a rant about that. So you don't want the bell housing or the transmission itself resisting the torquing of the engine, because that's not what that thing is meant to do. That's why transmission mounts tend to be very flimsy, which is also why you'll get a lot of wheel hop and everything else. But you don't want the transmission mount holding the engine from twisting. You want the motor mounts to be doing that. And then the transmission mount should just be holding the transmission from moving up and down or side to side. It shouldn't be trying to resist the transmission from twisting. Because the case of the transmission is meant to keep the gears meshed. It is not meant to resist to the torquing of the engine. Those are two different torquing scenarios, and you'll see a lot of guys break bell housings or whatever, and then just claim that they make so much power they broke it, when it's actually ignorance that broke it, not the power of the engine. The same goes with U-joints. You can break a 1-ton U-joint with a 4-cylinder in a Jeep if you don't have that thing set just right, as many guys with Jeeps and stuff probably know. So now I'm installing all the ICT billet stuff. This is an entire system from water pump forward. They make them for small block Chevy, big block Chevy. They make them for a lot of stuff. But this is a very, very good system. This is the first time I've used it. It went together perfectly. And other than there was one bolt that they have for a cover, and I meant to message them on this, but I forgot. But anyway, they send the wrong size bolt. It's too long. and it bottoms out. So, and it's called for in the directions, but it's too long, and it's just bolting to their own stuff. So it's just a simple mistake. All I had to do is trim it down and put it in there. But that was the only mistake in the whole thing, and it was really, really good otherwise. The mounts I made, those are just 2-inch channel, and then with the eighth inch rubber, like a soft rubber in between, and that is same top and bottom, and that holds the radiator pretty rigidly without it without being so rigid that it'll break as the car and chassis flex. This is the master cylinder. The way I mounted it up, that ends up having to get changed because the car will not work with that vacuum booster. It works once, but if you're in stop-and-go traffic or at a cruise or something, you end up losing vacuum. The motor has a solid roller cam in it, so it doesn't make. Plus, it's a D-stroked motor, so it doesn't make much in the way of vacuum for sustaining good power brakes. So now I'm building the transmission cover on the inside of the car, and I'm just countersinking screws around the outside of it, and that will look okay. I don't like the way it ends up looking the way I finished it, so I'm probably going to modify that later. The car still is the way I do it here. I tried to get all artsy fartsy with my little grinder there, and make some swirls and stuff, and I don't like it. If someone else did it, I'd probably like it, but when I do it, I don't like it. So we still need to add a boot to it. That boot is covering the shift linkage, but we still need to add a boot to seal the interior of the car from the underside of the car. So now I'm installing a carpet kit that I've had sitting in a box for more than 20 years. So it is very, very wrinkly, and it was also way too wide. I had to take like 3 inches out of the center of it. And by way too wide, I mean it was way too wide in the transmission tunnel area. Like it was meant for a car with a way bigger transmission tunnel than ours. So it was a big poofy mess in there. So now I got the headers installed, and as you can see right there, they fit like they've always fit on this body style car. And I don't know why that is. No one's ever improved upon it, but it's extremely close to the frame on the driver's side there. So now we're going to do our exhaust. So this is all stainless exhaust, and we're going to do it with stainless MIG. And so if you're doing it with MIG, it's better to expand the joints instead of trying to butt them like you're doing with TIG, like you would do with TIG weld if you're building a show car or something like that. This isn't a show car. This is just a street car. So we're going to expand all the pipes on the receiving end side, and then we'll MIG weld it. This makes building the exhaust go a lot faster. It's a lot easier. It ends up looking still pretty good. And you could do it if you're going to TIG weld it as well this way, especially if you're just learning TIG. This would be a way to do it. It's a lot easier to weld it this way than it would be to do it if you're just mitering them and welding them butt to butt. So this goes a lot faster. So if I'm building a street car, this is the way I want to do it. If you want information on that expander that I just used, I actually built that, or I put that together using 2 different things, one from Harbor Freight and one from Amazon, and I put a link to that in the description below, and I built that. They're fairly easy to build, and they even expand stainless steel like you just saw me do there. So these hangers I also put in the link in the description below, because those hangers are really good. They hold rigidly, but not so rigidly that they vibrate the car. So they're kind of my favorite go-to hanger on a non-show car situation. So okay, so now we're going to mount the fuel cell, and we're going to mount it through the floor pan, because I want to mount it as low as possible. So it's kind of going to occupy where the old fuel tank was, and a little bit of the trunk space as well. You can see there's a hole already in my car, and that was because we had to replace the fuel pump on the side of the road. And at the time, I thought it was real clever. We had an inverter and then a corded grinder. That's how we cut the floor out, because there wasn't battery grinders at the time. But now there's battery operated everything, so it would be irrelevant. So I just made a little aluminum cover for it and then riveted it in. That looks pretty good. And then I just ensured that the tank's going to fit through with adequate clearance. And then we're going to use this edge seal stuff on it so that the sheet metal doesn't cut through the tank, hopefully, anytime in the future. So you end up having to kind of hammer the stuff on. I use that nylon hammer. Those are a must-have in the shop. They're just cheap things, but they're really nice for kind of just tapping stuff in like that. So I'm hanging the tank from long bolts with pipes. So the pipe is basically just a giant spacer, and it works really well for mounting the tank. And then the nice part is, if it's too low, like it is right here, you can actually just cut those pipes shorter and move it up. So I ended up moving this up a little bit. You get the point, so we're not going to show you that part. But it's kind of a good way of mounting them. It works out pretty good. It's pretty easy and fast, and it doesn't look too shabby at the end. So now I got my QA1 shocks and my Umi Performance control arms. Those all worked perfectly. You do have to weld onto the brackets of the rear end, but it's super easy to set up because it basically bolts together, and then you just have to weld around it so it doesn't twist around. And it relocates the lower control arm lower, and you actually have two positions you can run it in, but since I'm running this big Herb Adams or a sway bar, I'm not sure if you can still buy those anymore. But since I'm running that huge Herb Adams sway bar, I have to run it on the upper mount holes. So now let's get into some fuel system stuff. This is all the factory Holley fuel system stuff. So if you buy the Holley with a kit, this is all the hardware that they give you aside from the adapter that I needed on my tank itself. The rest of it is all supplied via Holley. Not many of these kits come with the external regulator like this. A lot of them now are regulated from the throttle body itself, and so you may not end up with a regulator down there like I did. I like that method of it, but it's kind of a thing of the past. So I ran the lines up through the frame rail and up, which is how the factory did it as well. I ran them inside an additional rubber tubing just in case they rub on something in there, since you can't mount them while they're in there. So I ran them inside of another rubber hose. I just use irrigation, the AG200 hose. It's cheap and it's good to use as protection for other things. So that was a Moroso battery box. It needs to be a sealed battery box since it's in the trunk, and it's with the fuel cell, so that'll have a vent and everything that goes out the bottom of the car. Technically, I need a firewall in between the fuel cell or the trunk area and the passenger compartment. So I still need to do that yet. I haven't done it yet. Just spoiler alert on the build. There still needs to be a firewall there that we'll have to add here in the near future if we want to race this car at the track. So now I'm just topping off all my fluids and everything, and we're getting ready for first start. Yoink! One thing I do want to point out on that, after you do your configuration on there, you have to cycle the key on and off to complete the setup. If you have this style where you have an external fuel pressure regulator that you have to set, don't cycle the key yet. Leave it on because the fuel pump stays running. And as soon as you turn it off and turn it on again, it's only going to prime, and then it'll shut off like it is right now. The ignition is on right now. So I did want to point that out. If you do that, I believe you could either jump the fuel pump relay or do it another way, but if you're setting up the car and doing all that stuff, just kind of put that in your sequence. I pride myself on having not very dramatic for first starts, unlike every other car channel that you'll see, where something always goes wrong, as simple as that may be. And I don't like that. Bonehead move. The fittings came installed in this thing and I left them up top. That's not right. This hose should have been at the bottom of this tank. A good thing I just filled the tank, because now I'm gonna have to drain it and move this hose to the bottom down here. That's how it's supposed to be. And then this is the vent that goes down in case everything gets overfilled. It'll leak out of that hose, which I have right over my little drip pan right there. So we'll run it again, and this will probably get sucked down, but it may overflow before it sucks down the first time, since we still have a little bit of air in our cooling system, or at least I assume we do. Yeah, so far so good. The headers look right now. All right, so that's all looking good. Let's start tucking the front bumper. I may take an oil bath. Yep. Yucky. So now let's go put it in the press and we'll squeeze the rest of the oil out of it. You can see here, but look at the length of the strut and how far in we're moving this thing. Okay, that's all the oil there. I oversized these holes to shift them up. I slotted the holes on the frame to shift this up. And then I ground the top off so it didn't hit the frame. And then I had to slot this hole to drop this bracket down. So basically I'm moving this entire assembly up. And then if all this works out, we're gonna weld it right in here. All right, so the lines on it look pretty good until you get to the outside edge, and basically the bumper is just way too wide. So I'm good with this for now. So now we'll move on, start doing our body and paint, and then we'll start cutting up on this bumper to make it fit the rest of the way here in a little bit. So what they call that is tucking the bumpers. And so that's what I did. And what that did, it moved the bumper obviously in and up, and it eliminated that filler panel that was all rotten that was on the front of the car at the beginning of the video that I was crumbling in my hands. That's what we eliminated. And then on the back, we're doing the exact same thing. It's a little bit more involved on the back than it is on the front because you have to modify the taillight panel a little bit. And then I originally was going to do the same thing with the struts that I did with the front, but it didn't move it in far enough. And it was harder to move it up with those struts. There was just too much stuff going on. So instead, I ended up just building brackets for it instead of using those struts at all. I just built some brackets and mounted it up that way. But we'll do that after body and paint. So now we're going to strip down the rest of the car and get ready for our paint booth. Now, one of the hardest parts about doing it with these cars, I mean, even when they were newer, they were kind of a pain getting stuff off that without damaging it. They just were not really intended on being taken apart very, very well. Not like newer cars. Newer cars are a lot easier. What I'm doing here is I'm actually filling in the factory mirror holes because we're going to use a 67 Chevelle mirror, and we're actually going to mount it farther up the door and forward on the door, up in that raised area in the door. So that's my plan there. I don't like those factory mirrors. I never have. The mirrors themselves are kind of pieces of junk. They always come loose and all that stuff. And two, I just don't like the look of them. So we're going to use a more classic style mirror. So this is our paint booth. This is an inflatable paint booth I got off Amazon. It is extremely nice. But if you're going to paint a lot, build a paint booth. But if you don't, and you actually have a space outside, you can actually run this thing outside is what it's intended for. But it's really, really cool. I'll put a link down in the description below for this one. I can't recommend this thing enough. This is a great paint booth. It's very, very affordable. But one thing I did do to mod it is I added a frame, a PVC frame, if you look real closely, that the lights are mounted to. I added a frame so at night when I wasn't in it, I could turn it off and it wouldn't fall down on the car. So I don't have to run the fans the entire time I'm doing this, since, you know, being a one-man show, this is good, and I'm doing all my body work and stuff in the booth because I don't want to destroy my shop with it. I'd rather clean out the booth than clean out my entire shop. So body work is body work. I am not really I'm decent at body work, but it's been so long since I've done it that it's basically like I'm starting all over on it. And so I do a lot of things that aren't very time efficient, but it ends up working out. I found a couple of bumps in the back quarter panel, which is what I was fixing there with my spring tools. I didn't want to hammer and dolly it because I didn't want to unmask it. So I just used a little spring tools to knock them down. And then I just made them down below level. So then I just used a little bit of filler and did some body work and stuff on them. So I'm all primed and all that stuff. Body work's done. That took me about 2 days. And now we're just spraying the color, which is just a single stage white. It's actually basically an equivalent to what DuPont Imron was, but they don't really make there's an Imron still, but it's not the same as what it used to be. And this is essentially the same thing. So it's just like an industrial paint. Goes on a little bit thicker, but it actually looks really nice. And for a single stage paint, the only drawbacks to it are, one, I wouldn't do it metallic or anything in it, only if you're doing solid color. And two, it's a little bit harder to buff because it's such a hard paint when it's done. They say it's harder to buff, but I don't think it's I actually like it being hard like that. But maybe it's just easier for an amateur to buff harder paint than it is softer paint. But I like that paint. It's really good, and it goes on real thick. It looks like factory paint, really. By the time I was done, I was kind of going, I didn't want to color sand and buff this whole car, so I was kind of just going for factory orange peel. And for being someone who's not a professional painter like me, it laid down really good, and I'm very happy with the overall finish of it. So now we're going to build some inner fender liners. So this is UHMW that I just got from McMaster Car, and it's just I think it was a 12-inch by 24-inch sheet of UHMW, quarter-inch thick, and I'm just going to make that to make just some inner fenders that'll just protect the hood enough from a rock. But I don't really need like the splash guard. We're not going to be driving this in the rain or anything. I don't need that full inner liner, so this just ends up looking a lot cleaner. And the UHMW will be very resistant and to rocks and everything, and it'll actually silence them down quite a bit. You won't hear the rocks hit that liner, but I think those turned out pretty good. I'm actually really happy with those, and the whole project only took me about 45 minutes to do. Now it's time to phone a friend so that you can get the hood installed. And on that one, I just put studs in the furthest forward holes, and then set it on. It's just a stud, a bolt with no head, and then add the rear 2 bolts, and then your help can leave, and you can get on to adjusting the hood. The rear on these cars are real easy to do because they actually just the arms for it just slide into the trunk lid itself, so it's real easy to do that one on your own. Now just bolting on the nose and lining it up, which takes a little bit of time, and you got to be real careful, and you're terrified of cracking it or splitting your paint or everything while you're doing it. I got pretty good, pretty lucky with it, and everything worked out really well. And I forgot to black out behind the grill, so I did that while it was on the car. It would have been a lot easier had I done it first. And now I'm blacking out everything else. We're going to black out this whole car. There's not going to be any chrome on this car, so everything's getting scotch padded down and painted black. And even the markers are getting black, so I find it, if you use the gray Scotch pad on a lens before you use your lens tint, it actually works really well. That stuff actually melts the plastic. So if you Scotch Brite it and get rid of the gloss on it, it actually works really well, and it'll be glossy again once that paint hits it and it kind of melts in. So they end up looking pretty good. I like the look of them. It kind of matches the sheen of the car, where they're not overly shiny, but they're not really dull either. So now I'm done with my booth, so I'm going to take it down. So I'm going to clean it out real good, so it's basically ready to go for the next time we use it, which will be really soon, because I got 2 projects lined up that I need this booth for. So I'm going to roll it up, and it rolls up pretty good. It was a little tricky to get it in the bag, but I got it back in the bag, basically just like putting away a sleeping bag or whatever. It's just giant. All in all, that thing weighs probably 80 pounds, so it's pretty big to be lifting. But in the end, again, I can't recommend that booth enough. That thing was great. So tail lights and all that stuff, those are probably my favorite thing I've blacked out ever in the history of blacking things out. I think those tail lights and that housing and everything just look absolutely wicked blacked out. So I'm really happy with that. But again, I'm probably really partial to these cars, where a lot of people aren't as partial to them as I am. So I put a new trunk seal on, blacked out all the aluminum trim, and putting all new clips on, and we're going to go ahead and get that snapped in. That goes on very easy if you put new clips in there. I'll get this window cleaned up here, and then we will get going on the rear bumper. So we still have to narrow this bumper. Remember, we kind of got it roughly fit, and now I need to also narrow it, so that, because once you move them in and move them up, they start looking really wide. So we're going to take about 1.5 inches out off the width of this thing. About 3/4 of an inch per side, a little more than 3/4 of an inch per side. On this back bumper, I actually got some brazing wire. So it's not even MIG welding. You're welding it like MIG, but you're actually brazing it with bronze. And it's amazingly strong stuff. So I just tacked it up and made sure it was going to fit right. But that bronze wire, it worked really well. If I get rear-ended real hard, I suppose it could break off of there, but it's definitely not going to break. And I had plenty of space on the inside to just leave a really big reinforcement of it on the inside. But the reason I did that is I thought it would be easier to finish with the bronze instead of steel, and it actually made it more difficult because it was softer than the steel around it. So as you're trying to sand it, it would actually kind of sand faster than the steel, so you ended up with a dent everywhere the weld was. So it was actually more challenging to finish. So I wouldn't actually recommend that. I thought it was going to be an easier way, but it ended up being a more difficult way. So there's the little brackets that I was telling you I ended up making for the back. They were just real simple brackets I made out of a couple pieces of channel. And then just drilled some holes in it and did it that way. So now we're onto the front, and I'm basically doing the exact same thing. The front's a little more difficult of a shape because the bumper actually grows as it goes in, even though it doesn't really look like it. So you kind of have to cheat to line everything up on that one. And that one I did do with steel. It took a little bit of buttering it up with the welding wire, and then I just kind of had to grind it so that it kind of all flowed together, and it ended up looking pretty good. So this is the Chevelle mirror I was telling you about. So I blacked them out and then mounted them up on the upper portion of the door there, and that worked out pretty good. That was a real easy project to do. So one thing I didn't show is I blasted and painted the original push bars to the car, and got those all mounted up on there. Those still have the original rubber pads on them and everything, so they have a little bit of battle scars on them, but that's okay. They'll probably be used when I take this car to the track. It's amazing how often you use the push bars on the cars. I've used the Crown Vic's car push bars quite a few times at the track. But I'm really happy with the way that turned out. It took about 1.5 inches out of that bumper as well. So now I'm going to change all the window motors. Since we have the doors all taken apart, I'm going to replace all the window motors while we have them apart so that we don't have hopefully won't have a surprise of a window failure. And then I'm greasing up the tracks. That's what I was doing there on the bench. I was using my power probe to run the motor back and forth as I was running some lithium grease through the track for the I don't like that style window motor. Those is probably my least favorite style window motor. But they work, but they do eventually, the grease all dries out of them and they start having to labor pretty hard moving the windows up and down. So I'm not going to show all the video on putting the doors together because you really can't tell what I do. And if I actually showed detail enough for you to duplicate what I'm doing assembling doors, we'd be here for a month because there's a lot to putting a door together. It's not hard, and you shouldn't have to force anything. That's my advice on putting doors together. I replaced all the weather stripping, all the window run channels, the felts, and then the weather stripping around the doors and all that fun stuff on all the doors. And then I replaced all the clips on the door panels and put them together, and hopefully we won't have to be taking these apart anytime soon. Now I'm going to remove the windshield. We're going to change the windshield out. So I'm removing the windshield, which is a pain in the butt, and I would hate to do windshields for a living, but it's not that bad, but it's just one of those things that's so time consuming. While we have the windshield out is the perfect time to replace the headliner, because the headliner is the only way to get this thing out is through, maybe you could get really creative and get it out of a door, but it's actually very, very challenging. I think you'd break it into a million pieces doing it that way. The only way really to effectively to get it out is through the windshield, maybe through the back window, but since you can buy front windshields, I think going through the front windshield would be better. Now I'd used a bunch of Gorilla Tape on the corners of this because the foam, this is like a foam headliner. It was deteriorating pretty badly, so I used just Gorilla Tape on both sides just to kind of hold it together, and then when I glued the fabric on, hopefully that'll all hold together. Everywhere it was kind of breaking up is where you have things tightened onto it, so it's not really a matter of the headliner falling off in that area. It's just a matter of kind of holding all that foam together while you get it installed. So I blacked out all the window frames, and now I'm cutting off my shifter because it was way too long. I don't know. You know, it's typical 80s car thing. They had the longest shifter in the world. I don't know why it's so long. The ZFs are so easy to shift. Okay, so right there, I didn't tell you about it, but I restained the back seat. And I actually did a short detailing on how to do that very well. I'll link that down in the description below because that actually is pretty informative. That seat was very sun faded, and it looks brand new now. So it's one of those things where it looked like it needed to be reupholstered, and I was able to fix it for about $7 or so. So now we are building a battery switch, because if we want to race this car, we're going to have a battery switch to turn off our battery since it's rear mounted. So you have to have a switch. Doesn't matter how slow your car is. You need a switch in the back if you put your battery in the back, if it's not factory equipped that way. So we're building a switch bracket that I'm going to put behind the license plate. Where you used to be able to fill the car up, the fuel tank filler used to be there. So I'm going to run it there, and I'm going to hope they accept that. They may make me take my plate off instead of just leaving it folded down at the racetrack. But I think they'll be okay with it, just like that, as long as I leave my plate folded down. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. To save time, because I only had a little window this day when I was doing this, I wrapped it instead of painting it, which will be totally fine, and just mounted it up that way. So normally the plates held in with like a really aggressive sheet metal style screw into fiberglass, and I drilled through it and nut and bolted it this time, since we are holding on our switch now as well. So I didn't want to overload those little screws that I seem to hold up all right, but they sure don't seem like they would. So now I'm going to get artsy-fartsy with the trunk latch. So I painted it black, and before it was cured all the way, I took some clear, gloss clear, and I painted it, and I was trying to pull the black to the outside so it made like that starburst look. And that's about as artsy as I get. But I like doing stuff like that. It's fun, the little details. And I like our Death Tool dually that I built before I started the channel. I have a lot of little intricate things like that I did while I was putting that thing together. So now we're wiring up the battery and the switch and everything. And the only thing I really need to point out here is when you turn your switch off, it needs to turn the engine off, which means you have to run a battery cable from your alternator all the way to the battery. Because if you leave it attached up front, even if you flip the switch off, the car will stay running because the alternator will keep it running, and that doesn't work. So you'll fail tech if you do that. So you'll have to run a battery cable all the way to the battery from your alternator. It's the biggest drawback I feel to putting the battery in the back. So now I'm applying glue. I have a friend who does windshields for a living, so he taught me everything I know about installing windshields and how to cut the tip and get the glue on there and all that stuff. Which it's fairly easy. I would way rather have someone else do it, but I am able to do it myself. So it's okay to do it that way. But I couldn't get this car down to him, and he's too busy to come up and do a mobile install. So now we're doing the Hydroboost swap. So I'll leave a link in the description below for this Hydroboost. This almost bolted on. One bolt hole was different on the way it mounted to the firewall, and then obviously you're going to have to mess with your linkage to it, the push rod to it. You're going to have to mess with that to make it work. I have those Datsun pedals in there, so my scenario is going to be different than everyone else's. But it's fairly simple on getting that mounted up, and then we'll get to the making the master cylinder work on it. That's also there's a little bit of adaptation to do there as well. So, and we'll get to that here in a second as well. So I drained the fluid while I was waiting for something, I don't remember what, on the rear end, because we're gonna have to get into that. So I was decided to let it drain. So now I need to take my master cylinder reservoir off without breaking it. And I had the brilliant idea, I'm gonna call it brilliant because it worked, of putting this, it's like a furniture lift bag underneath it, inflating it, and that pushes up hard enough to where just a little bit of prying and it pops right off. And I was able to get the original one off and put it on a master cylinder that was meant for a truck with four-wheel disc brakes. It happens to be the exact same looking master cylinder. I just needed my reservoir on it so that it actually sat level. So now this is the rod that goes in between the booster and the master cylinder, and they are rounded. We have to shorten them off. You'll have to shorten them. Most likely, if you're going from vacuum to Hydroboost, you're going to have to shorten this rod. And even though I have a lathe, I find it much easier to do it with a drill and a sander like that. You just want to make that end really, really round, and then you're going to want to check it so that it fits in there. And just move it around, spinning it, and just make sure it's not grabbing. And that'll tell you that it's no matter how you have it, if it wants to stay centered and it's not grabbing as you're twisting it around your fingers, that'll make sure that you got it the right radius on your drill. Otherwise, you'll have to adjust. So now our plastic on mine, I have this plastic guide for it that holds that thing nice and centered in between them all, just in case everything gets slack, it doesn't fall down. Some of them have a metal style retainer that holds it up, but these cars actually had this plastic one, so I had to shorten that as well since everything's short. And then you want to make sure that the plastic isn't doing the pushing and then just the push rod is, and that's what I was double checking there. So now we just install it just like you're supposed to, and all your clearances should be good. Nothing should be getting pressed while in the neutral state. So when you bolt that on there, you shouldn't be pushing the plunger down at all in the master cylinder. Otherwise, you'll need to shorten up that rod a little bit more. So here's my bracket for our combination valve, proportioning valve. I'm mounting it up top, and then I'm going to put where it used to be down on the frame rail, I'm going to install a line lock, which I started to film here, and for some reason I don't have footage of it. So I'm using my 4 Lifelines flaring tool down here. So I have 2 different style flaring tools. This 4 Lifetimes one is really, really good because you can actually use it by hand like that. You don't have to mount it in a vise, and I really like that. I also have the Eastwood style flaring tool, which is really, really nice too, but it's really hard to use that in position. So now we're going to start on the rear disc brakes, and full disclosure here, I cannot recommend these disc brakes. So unfortunately, these brakes don't fit the way they intended for you to do it. There's interference with the frame. And then the reason I cannot with genuinely recommend these to anyone, even though I'm able to make them work here, is I called these guys to tell them they have interference with the frame and the caliper. And they argued with me and told me it's because my car's lowered. And I'm like, no, any car is going to hit the frame. This is in the factory suspension travel. There's interference with the frame. The caliper sticks too far in and it hits the frame. He says, I'm the first person to ever have this problem. And I'm like, that is impossible. If people actually have these on these Caprices, they're running around with their master cylinders smashing into their frame, which is extremely dangerous. And for him to blow me off like that was very, very concerning. So what I just did right there was I had to oversize the holes on my axles. So these are these were, I think they're Yukon axles. And I voided the warranty by oversizing the holes because I need to do the extended studs just in case we want to run slicks on this at the track. Otherwise, I don't believe I'd need them until I hit a certain threshold of time, which we won't ever hit in this car. So that it's not the time that's the issue. It's that if we want to put slicks on the car, I think we need those extended studs. And double check, obviously, the rule book on that one. I'm not 100% sure. So what I had to do to fix these calipers, I ended up having to rotate them around and run the caliper low into the rear on it, and that makes it so the brake cables still work. It's just not the intended caliper location on them, and that does work, but it does when I took the spring out and collapsed the suspension all the way onto the factory bump stop, it's still extremely close to hitting the frame rail. And as you can see right there, this is a good view of it. You can see the e-brake assembly stuff is in interference with the frame rail as the axle goes all the way up. So anyway, that was kind of a really disturbing part. It's really disgusting to me when people blow you off like that, when you're telling them of a safety concern to their products. So now I'm modifying my shift handle. So this is a Hurst pistol grip shifter that we made fit the stock of the ZF6 shift tower. And I'm adding a button to it. I know you can buy these with buttons already, but I was already committed to this one, so we're just going to do it ourselves. The shift tower on that thing is so big that I didn't have room to run the wire out the bottom like I would like to. So I just made it come out of the handle where my hand isn't. And then I just glued it in with some E6000. And then once that dried, I just tipped it up and I filled the entire thing with hot melt hot glue, and that just will ensure everything just kind of, the hot glue is not going to be a good adhesive, but it'll fill the void and it'll keep everything from wiggling around, and that's all I did. I kind of preheated everything with a torch before I ran the glue down there. So I put about an entire stick of glue in there, just holding that bottom of the switch assembly and stuff in. In the end, I'm really happy with the results. I think that looks really cool. Even with the wire sticking out the side, that's not too bad. It's very aviation looking, or I must say. And this is a iron Yukon cover for the 8.5-inch diff. These are 30 spline axles, by the way, in this thing. And then the disc brakes will act as they'll hold the axle in the event that we were to break one. Now I am installing the Wilwood calipers. So these calipers are really cool. They fit the factory rotor, and they actually use the factory pads, but it is converting it from a single piston caliper to a dual piston caliper. So it's still a floating caliper though. A 4-piston caliper would have 2 pistons on either side. And these are just a 2-piston with a floating caliper. So it still works. So now we're installing some really cool center caps I found from Joe's Racing. I got these online. I just stumbled upon them. And they're really cool, but it does involve you drilling and tapping your factory hub. All right, so now I get to play with our Bamboo Lab. I think it's like an X1 Carbon or something like that, 3D printer. I printed these emblems out. I designed them up and printed them out of ABS, and I'm gluing them on with some E6000. I'm just using tape there to temporarily hold them up so they don't slide down while I'm not paying attention. And I'm so excited how these turned out. They turned out so cool. And I'm really, really anxious to see how many people notice that it says CaPIECE instead of Caprice. So anyway, now that I'm an expert at 3D printing, I printed out these are some center caps for the rear wheels, since I don't really have a center cap for them without using the Jeep style ones that came with those wheels. And I printed them out. I had to do them in 2 pieces though. And so I just designed in a little dowel so that it's self-aligning. And then I just used ABS cement to glue them together. And I think they turned out pretty cool. So now it's time to put some graphics on the car. I'm just doing them on the door and the hood. I ended up putting some on the windows and stuff later, not on film. But they turn out pretty cool. And the cool part about these things is they come off. They don't damage your paint or anything. It's essentially temporary, but it's permanent temporary. So if you get sick of them, you can take them off. So what I ended up doing on the hood, I kind of liked this the way it was. And I really debated just leaving it like that. I got a little bubble there. That's what I was working on. You try to keep that from happening, but sometimes they happen. You can get them out. You just got to work at them a little bit. But anyway, I should have just left that alone, I think. But instead, I decided to use that as an underlay and overlay over top of it. And by blacking out the center part of the car following the body line. And so that's what I'm doing now. So what I put knifeless tape down the side, which is it's a tape with a string in it. So you put the tape down and you run it down the body line that you want, and then you wrap over top of it, and then you pull the string out and it cuts the wrap on the way out. It works pretty cool. So as long as you put this thing down there nice and straight, it'll cut nice and straight. So it's a really cool way of doing that. So you don't have to line up edges or anything like that, pre-cutting your film on the way down. I did the same thing on the hood there, and then my battery died. But I did the same thing down the hood, and it turned out cool. I haven't decided if that part's grown on me entirely yet, but you can always take it off. It's just wrap film. So if I end up not liking that, I'll take it off. But it is nice to drive with a flat black hood. I will give it that. So as you can see, I've cheated a little bit and already driven it a little bit. But let's take this thing for a drive so you can see what it sounds like. It drives really, really well. Keep in mind that I'm still trying to break in the engine, so I'm not revving it past, well, I'm revving it really high for an engine normally, but in the world of these D-stroked motors, it's not very high. So we go about 7,500 RPM on the drive, and I'm telling you that now so that I don't have to talk over the driving videos, but it turns out pretty cool. So I'm really happy with this. It has enough of nostalgia and the old upgrades that I did a long time ago to make it really nostalgic. All right, guys, so I may be a bit biased, but I think that thing turned out really cool. I'm really happy with it. I'm not 100% convinced I like the hood thing yet, but it's just vinyl. If I don't like it, off it comes. That's the best part about vinyl. You can change your mind. Will the Crown Vic hang with the CaPIECE at the track? I don't think so. If you're not familiar with this car, it's a twin turbo manual swapped Crown Vic. It has rear mount turbos and a water meth system. A two-step, and that's about it. It's a junkyard build. Really, really fun car. I don't think it quite has what it takes to hang with the Caprice the way it sits. So we're going to upgrade it. So coming up on the channel soon, we're going to try to refine this one a little bit more so that these two will be a little bit closer at the track for the summer. Because this summer, we're going to be racing these two head to head. So it'll be quite interesting. So definitely stay tuned, like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you there.